Very much, Joan, for that slightly misleading introduction to someone who may no longer be a socialist but still vibrates to Marxism. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. I think I'll be able to be reasonably terse given the very heavy artillery that follows me on our side. I think it might perhaps have been felt when I was chosen that the case for atheism should not be made by the spokesman for its moderate wing, Richard Dawkins. That it might be okay to have at least one extremist on the panel. And I'll begin at once by recalling an exchange I had recently in Colorado Springs with a spokesman of America's evangelical broadcasting wing, a much overrated but nonetheless significant force in American politics. This broadcaster asked me, in response to my own statement of unbelief, he said, "I insist that you answer the following question, and that you answer it with a yes or a no." I braced myself. I accepted the challenge unseen. He said, "You are to imagine yourself in a strange city where you've never been before. You are to imagine nightfall coming on, and you to be without friends or succor in this town. And you are to ask yourself whether you would feel safer or less safe when you saw a dozen men coming towards you in the dusk, if you were to know that they had recently come from a prayer meeting." This is I think I can justifiably say I'm relaying to you, comrades, friends, brothers, sisters, the challenge that was put by the religious to me. You'll see at once it's not a yes-no answer. You can't give a yes-no answer to that, but I accept it anyway. I said, very well, I won't give a Sesame Street reply, but just without leaving the letter B, I have been in that situation. In Bombay, in Belfast, in Beirut, in Belgrade, in Baghdad, and many other places too. And I won't tell you about all of them, but let me just, as it were, fill in some of those latent blanks. In Belfast, the capital city of one of the provinces of this, our United Kingdom, as everybody here knows, everything, culturally, educationally, economically, politically, socially, has been very gravely retarded for at least a quarter of a century. At least half a century and maybe more since partition, and before that, because partition is both the outcome and the cause of sectarian warfare in this town, by the simple fact that there are people there who are willing to kill not just one another, but one another's children on the basis of what kind of Christian they are. Horrible things are done, not just in pubs and clubs, but on the streets, on housing estates, on university campuses in that city still, despite the relatively good news we've had today, where the situation remains dominated by barbaric sectarian party leaders. On this and no other basis. Both churches demand that their children are sent to separate schools. They each agree with the other that above all things, their own children must be protected from the faith of another faith. I don't think I need to elaborate very much more on how horrendous the consequences of that have been and how they are enshrined, by the way, in our own constitution, which mandates that our own head of the church is also the head of the state and of the armed forces, with all the ludicrous Windsor consequences that you get if you found a national church on the family values of Henry VIII. These conditions, which are farcical in England, Wales, and Scotland, are tragic and ugly, only a few minutes flying time from where we sit. If I pass on from Belfast to, say, Baghdad, where I've recently been, and without reopening any of the arguments about the rightness or otherwise of the coalition intervention in Mesopotamia, I think it can be granted by any fair-minded person that what was most needed in Iraq after 30 years of fascism and war was a period of reflection, a short interlude of calm during which Iraqis could look about themselves and decide perhaps for whom they'd like to vote, perhaps what kind of country they'd like to live in, what kind of federal system they might wish to evolve, and to do so unmolested by violence or terror. The parties of God have vetoed every hope of that process. The parties of God now have the Iraqi people in their jaws, and they're saying to them, it's not enough just to kill foreigners or to rail against Jews or Christians or secularists. That's nothing like enough. It's only in Iraq, not only, mainly, chiefly in Iraq, that it's considered perfectly all right, in fact, a religious duty to blow up the mosques, to destroy the religious schools of other Muslims, of the Muslims of another school, not unlike the pattern of Belfast. It's not enough to have faith, you must have the right version of your own faith, or risk death, mutilation, and humiliation, and the destruction, the immiseration, the torture of Iraqi society is something that all of us can read about every day. Suppose we're to go to Beirut, the pearl of the Levant, the most civilized and beautiful and cultured city of the Middle East, and to see what happens when, for politicized reasons, a sectarian constitution is in place which says that the president of Lebanon must always be a Maronite Christian, that the speaker of its parliament must always be a Shia, that its vice president must always be a Sunni, that the Druze must have their share, and so on, leaving out at the very bottom, I'm afraid, such forces as Kurds and Armenians, but making everyone defined in their citizenship by their faith. Do I need to elaborate what that's done to retard, to bankrupt, to beggar, to disfigure, and to degrade what could have been an ideally plural and diverse and happy society? Remaining with letter B, shall I say Banja Luka? Shall I say Belgrade? Or just say Bosnia? Again, one of the most civilized enclaves of the Balkans for many years, protected by a secular constitution and the remains of what had been a secular and democratic republic. And just look what happens when it is decided that it is a matter of faith that determines your citizenship, your allegiance, your identity, your nature, your rights. See the recrudescence in the Europe of the late 20th and early 21st century of Catholic fascist parties we thought we'd left behind at Nuremberg, the Ustasha. The recrudescence of forces like the Chetniks, the Serbian Orthodox fascists who took exactly the same view except the other way around. See the craven way in which our spineless media, which always defers to people of faith, say that it was Serbs who shelled Sarajevo or Croats who shelled Mostar, when what they should have been saying was, today the Christian Orthodox militia bombarded an open city around the clock, or yesterday the Catholic forces shelled Mostar from dawn till dusk. They didn't do it because it's a matter of taste. We're supposed to respect people of faith, and we're supposed to respect them while they do that and do that and make this sort of excuse. There aren't enough words in my lexicon, at any rate, to express the contempt that I think any right-thinking person must feel for this conscription of this kind of medieval barbarism. Joan will tell me when I've got a minute. I don't know whether I'm yet trespassing on my rivals and my allies' time, but if I was to add Bombay to this list, the city that was very nearly ruined by the sectarian partition of India in 1947, 1948, where once again people were told it's a matter of faith what kind of Indian you are. You may have to become a Pakistani if you're Muslim. You may have to lose your life on the proposition. You may not just be a Hindu. Bombay more or less survived this, the terrifying ethnic cleansing and the pogrom that ensued when the subcontinent was mutilated and maimed and partitioned on this basis in the hopes of a genuine Indian unity and independence, ruined by way of appeasement of people of faith. But Bombay sort of recovered until recently, when now its name has been changed, its minority citizens persecuted, intimidated, driven out by a new Hindu nationalist party, the Shiv Sena, that says that, again, if you do not follow the right God, if you don't accept the supernatural as a real force in everyday life, you are not worth whatever it takes to become or to remain or be treated as an ordinary, democratic, civilized human being in, again, one of the great cities of Asia. Now, it's not part of my case, and I'm sure it's not part of Professor Grayling's or Professor Dawkins's either, to say that religion is the reason for all of this, or the exclusive or sole reason for all of it. I think it would be crude and reductionist to say that. But who is going to argue, I'll be fascinated to see, Who is going to argue that the matter of faith, that the religious allegiance, that the preachings of religion have not in all these cases gravely exacerbated, gravely deepened, gravely poisoned and prolonged all of these things that have made our tenuous civilization extremely difficult to defend, uphold, maintain, let alone to advance? I don't believe this case could be made. That's for a simple reason, because religion is not provided to us by revelation. It doesn't come from the heavens. It doesn't come from the beyond. It doesn't come from the divine. It's man-made. And it shows. It shows very well that religion is created, invented, imposed by a species half a chromosome away from the chimpanzee. It shows, doesn't it? Well, why do we deceive ourselves on this point? And is there anywhere, I'm now going to wind up, is there anywhere of the places I've mentioned, and I exempt Basra and all the other bees I could take you around, where it wouldn't be enormously welcome if there was a mass conversion to secularism, or a mass adoption of the secular idea and principle, of the principles of Bertrand Russell, who once spoke famously from this platform, of Thomas Paine, of Thomas Jefferson, of Voltaire, and others. And I'll close by saying that I want you to be on your guard against two false issues in this respect, and I'll be very brief. When I mentioned those gentlemen, and I could mention some ladies too in this connection, like Mary Wollstonecraft, don't let anyone tell you that, oh, well, secular tyranny is just as bad. After all, there have been fascist and communist dictatorships which have been just as revolting. Fascism, as you know, was supported by the Catholic Church all through its life, and in fact till after it had died, and still is defended by it. One of the leaders of the Axis was actually the Japanese leader, was actually a god. There's no way of saying fascism and National Socialism and the Axis was secular. And in the case of Stalinism and Maoism and the Khmer Rouge, the same mistake is made, and a religion is made out of man. It's the religious impulse itself that I think we need to oppose, to criticize in ourselves as well as in others. The argument from faith, in other words, the argument from certainty. So those of us who maintain this may not be described, my closing point, as fundamentalists or secularists, as certain cheap and demagogic and opportunist forces have recently been suggesting. We do believe in evidence, we do believe in skepticism, we do believe in reason. We hold our views with as much conviction and principle as any God-botherer does. But we are open to the argument, and we're going to prove it tonight to you. And don't let anyone dare to imply there's a moral equivalence between us and the fanatics and the fools and those who think they know God's will and can tell you what it is, who are our enemies, and your enemies too. So, I beg to propose the motion that stands in our name. Thank you.
I do not believe that religion is the root of all evil. Thank you, Channel 4. Religion is the root of quite a lot of evil, but that didn't make for a very catchy title. I just want to briefly reply to Dr. Spivey a couple of points. He says we're fighting a losing battle because religion is a part of our human nature. Well, speak for yourself. It's not a part of mine, and it's not a part of the great majority of my friends in universities in England and the United States and elsewhere. He also said, if we had no religion, how would we do without King's College Chapel, the Sistine Chapel, etc.? Well, you know, artists have to make a living, and in the time when the Sistine Chapel was built and its ceiling was painted, you know who had the money. Artists such as Michelangelo had to go where the patronage was. We shall never know the ceiling that Michelangelo might have painted if he had been commissioned to paint the Museum of Science, for example. We shall never know what Haydn's Evolution oratorio might have sounded like, or Beethoven's Mesozoic Symphony. Now, I suppose that apologists for religion would be likely to put forward 4 reasons for believing it to be a good thing. 4 things that religion does for us, and I call them explanation, exhortation, meaning morals, explanation meaning explaining the world, where we come from, where the universe comes from, and so on. Exhortation, what is good, what is bad. Inspiration, and consolation. And I think my colleague Anthony Grayling is likely to cover some aspects of exhortation. I shall be brief on that, therefore. Consolation, I often encounter people who say, but if you take religion away from people, how are they going to survive? How are they going to manage when they're bereaved, or when they lose a loved one, when they fear death themselves? And it's a reasonable point. It is certainly possible to obtain consolation from a lie. Many people will say, if you ask them, would you like your doctor to tell you when you have a mortal illness and you're only going to live another 6 months? There are people who will say, no, I would rather my doctor lied to me. And that's fine, and I would respect that wish if I were a doctor, if I thought that a patient wanted to be lied to. But I don't think it's a very dignified, general reason for supporting religion that it supplies consolation, unless, of course, it's true. And we haven't time to go into it, but I think there are very, very good reasons for thinking that there is absolutely no grounds for believing that there's any actual truth in the claims of religion. So those who gain consolation from religion, I must confess that I rather liken it to a child with a dummy in its mouth. I don't think it's a very dignified, a very respect-worthy posture for an adult to go around sucking a dummy with a comforter, which is what I think it essentially is. Inspiration, well, I've always found the inspiration, the heavens declare the glory of God, all things bright and beautiful, and so on, to be paltry, parochial, small-minded, compared to the inspiration that you can get by looking at the world of science. Deep space, deep time, as the late Carl Sagan showed us. Deep complexity in the study of life. The scientific study of these profound, beautiful, elegant mysteries is one of the greatest achievements of the human spirit. And insofar as religion offers an alternative or even positively stands in the way of scientific activity, then I think we would be well rid of it. Which brings me to the other of my 4 categories, explanation. In the field of explanation, science has all the cards. Religion used to aspire to a reasonably good hand, but no longer. There is no reason to suppose that any religion, any religious book, any religious teacher has anything to say whatsoever about such questions as where the universe comes from, what life is all about, what life is for, any of those questions, which once upon a time religion provided the best available answers. These are now completely washed up. There is no evidence for them at all. And it's worse than that, because the point I want to end up with is that religion debauches education insofar, and it's quite a long way, insofar as it interferes with the education of children and students. It's not just the teaching of falsehoods, it is that the indoctrination of children in the virtues of faith leads them to be immunized, to be placed on their guard against the enemies of faith, who they are told will come. It's as though it's rather like a computer erecting a firewall to prevent incoming information. I have talked to colleagues in America, scientists attempting to lecture to students on their subject, biology, and of course biology makes no sense without evolution. And whenever a lecturer mentions evolution, he sees a great sea of heads shaking, arms folded, and they are not listening. They are trained to give the right answers. They're trained to tick the right boxes when they do the exam. They know how to answer an exam on evolution, but they have been forewarned, forearmed by the firewall of faith. Whenever a teacher says anything about evolution, in effect, stop up your ears. Now that is debauching of education. A quote from Kurt Wise, who is an American geologist. He studied geology at Harvard, no less, under Stephen Jay Gould, no less, and he was set for a good career as an academic geologist, which all his life he had desperately wanted. The problem was, it came from within, it was his religious upbringing, his firewall of faith. And he couldn't reconcile the two, his scientific education with his religion, and he literally got a pair of scissors and went right through the Bible and cut out every verse that would have to go if he accepted his scientific education. And in the end, he decided there was nothing left of his Bible. He therefore tossed out science and said, and from then on, he said, with that in great sorrow, I tossed into the fire all my dreams and hopes in science. And he goes on, I am a young age creationist because that is my understanding of the scripture. As I shared with my professors years ago when I was in college, if all the evidence in the universe turns against creationism, I would be the first to admit it, but I would still be a creationist because that is what the Word of God seems to indicate. Here I must stand. If religion can do that to a highly educated Harvard geologist, just think what it can do to an average school child or student. Thank you.
When one gets up to speak this late in a debate, one's a bit tempted to quote that Hungarian MP who, after a long discussion in the Parliament in Budapest, stood up and said, everything has been said, but not everybody said it yet. And it's my turn. Some of you might have noticed the news item today about the Pope Benedict XVI, giving a sermon last weekend in Rome and telling the congregation, reminding them perhaps, that hell is a real place. It's a palpable, tangible place, and the eternal fires of hell really exist, and those who don't accept Jesus, he said, I'm paraphrasing here, will roast eternally, but because of their failure to do so. And this shows how very up-to-date Pope Benedict is, because obviously he's heard about tonight's debate, and this is an intervention. Although I've been trying to work out all day on which side it's an intervention. And is he trying to persuade you to vote, against the motion, or is he actually a fifth columnist on our side of the argument? Well, it isn't clear. Now, I imagine a Martian PhD student. I suppose there are also PhD students from Venus as well, but this is a Martian PhD student who is studying the ethical systems on planet Earth, and has read all the documents, all the treatises, all the philosophical works, the scriptures, the teachings of the Holy Fathers, and has come to the point at which he's got to do some field work. And so he is beamed down by the Martian equivalent of Scotty to Waterloo Station at rush hour, so there are plenty of people about. And he falls into conversation with people having coffee, waiting for their trains. And he asks them a question, actually rather an astute question. He doesn't ask them what they think is right and wrong, good or bad, and why. Instead, he asks them this. He says, what kind of people would you like your children to be when they grow up? And he asks them this because he wants to get from them, to elicit from them, their very best thoughts about the best kind of life. And so he knows that he's going to catch them in a sober and well-judging frame of mind when they think seriously about what kind of people they'd like their children to become. And he finds, when he's talked to enough such people, that there's quite a consensus among them. They say things like this: I'd like my children to be responsible people. I'd like them to take responsibility for themselves, get an education, get a good job. I'd like them to have a family and friendships, deep friendships, because they're so valuable and enriching. And with their family as well, I'd like them to care for their children tenderly and carefully, and I'd like them to bring up their children to think for themselves and to take responsibility for themselves. I wouldn't want my children to be just always submitting to the authority of, I don't know, a politician or a teacher. Or, I'd like them to be inquisitive and to inquire and to think for themselves. And then the Martian PhD student says to them, it's absolutely extraordinary that all you people say these things about what you want for your children, because this is nominally a Christian country, isn't it? I mean, and isn't it the case that even if you no longer actually believe the tenets of the Christian faith, you were sort of in the position of the young man from Moldavia? You remember that little poem? There was a young man from Moldavia who couldn't believe in the Saviour, so he erected instead, with himself as the head, the religion of decorous behaviour. And this was meant to be, deduced or inferred, at any rate, from the basis of Christian morality. But this nominally Christian country, says our Martian, how can it be that you've said what you said? It's astonishing. Because in the New Testament, you are taught to take no thought for the morrow. Consider the lilies of the field. Don't have a pension. Don't put money aside. Don't educate your children and help them to prepare for a future. Take no thought for the morrow. The lilies of the field don't, and yet you are not arrayed as these. Also, give away all your money, give it away to the poor, and follow me. Then if you have possessions, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to get into heaven. The eye of the needle, well, we know how that's been glossed in the centuries since, but it just says it's more difficult for a rich person, a comfortably off person, to get into heaven and to pass through the eye than for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. In other words, the teaching of the New Testament ethics, which I would submit to you is not bad as teachings of ethics go. It doesn't really compare to the great systems of Aristotle, let us say, or the Stoics, or of Buddhism. Theravada Buddhism is not a religion. It doesn't have any supernatural beings in it. It's a philosophy. Or of the moral outlook of the Enlightenment, or of some of the thinking about the good life, the well-lived, decent and responsible life today, none of which appeal to the existence of supernatural agencies as the source of a divine command. All right, the Christian ethical outlook is one of the better of those. And yet when you look at it and you see what it demands of you, it is very contrary to the way we think of a decent life now. And moreover, it says, I can imagine the Martian PhD hearing from his interlocutors on Waterloo Station that they want their children to be happy. Happy, says the Martian PhD student. I mean, it says, blessed are they who weep and mourn. I mean, don't you want them to be miserable so they can get into the afterlife? I mean, it looks as though there's such a radical inconsistency between one of the better religious ethical outlooks and what it is you want from your children, that it's very hard to know what to think about it. Because, after all, says the Martian, I've been reading all the documents. And as a result of reading them, I said to Scotty, the chap who beamed me down from Mars, I said, look, be very careful, won't you, about where I end up, both time and place. So I don't want to end up in Israel at the time of Moses, just in case they mistake me for a Midianite or an Amalekite or any of the others who were massacred. Please don't, make sure I don't end up in Spain in the late 15th century with Torquemada, or in Calvin's Geneva at the time he was burning Michael Servetus, or in Zwingli's Zurich when he was drowning the Anabaptists, or please not in today's Baghdad, Bombay, Beirut, even Belfast for that matter. Make sure you get me to Waterloo Station in 2007. Because when I'm not thinking about the better of the religious moralities in the Christian New Testament, gosh, really? I think about all these other teachings, I find that it is not simply a question of the teachings being very questionable, or not just a question of the practice allegedly based on those teachings, which is very questionable, but the entire assumption, the entire outlook about what it is to be a good person and to live a good and decent life, which is so at odds with the way we in our secularized modern Western liberal democracies have come to see as life of achieving and flourishing and doing well for others. And I end on this one note. Julia pointed out that, and so indeed did Nigel, that religion and its inspirations and the art it's produced and the rest have played a very important part in what you might call, and what I might, just speaking secularly, call the spiritual aspect of our lives, our emotional and intellectual responses, our enjoyment of beauty, our desire for love. And I mention this to you, as Hitch, in his eloquent intervention during that moment, was implying, those who don't have a religious outlook appreciate a fact about human beings, that for all their capacity for greed and unkindness and cruelty and the rest, they also have a remarkable capacity for the good, a deep sense of connectedness with other people and a desire to be connected with the world as a whole. You look at people in their gardens, or going for a walk in the country, or at a concert, or looking at pictures in an art gallery, and you see that you don't need supernatural agencies or religions or ancient scriptures to explain the fact that human beings are capable of good, and that most of the good that there is in the world has come from that source and not from some alleged supernatural source. Many thanks.
If they are strict materialists or physicalists, by which I mean that absolutely nothing exists except the physical universe, or if they're willing to allow for the possibility of a further reality, or indeed realities, other than the physical universe.
Right, who will take that question? Anthony?
I'm the least qualified, so perhaps I'd be the one.
Richard,
can you hear me? Well, I thought I had a microphone.
Well, can you hear him now? The microphone's on, yes?
Is it on or not?
Yeah.
Well, as the least qualified, I think I could probably be the most brief. I don't believe anyone on the other side can tell me that there's a non-material universe. It's a matter of Occam's razor, really, ladies and gentlemen. Those who say they know that there's a God, which is what a religious person must believe. They can't say it's optional. They can't say it's another name for human rights or charity. They must say they do believe there is something supernatural that provides faith. They can't get out of it like the rabbi tried to, by confusing it with good works. They must also say, if they're religious, that God knows what we should do, what we should eat, with whom we should have sex, in what positions, and so forth. If they don't say that, they're not religious. I'm very sorry. Now, I think it's very easy to tell right away. I may not know, in fact, I don't believe with my cranial capacity, even Professor Dawkins's cranial capacity, it's possible to know what's happening with dark material. We may never be able to know. But don't put your trust in anyone who says that they do. Those people are eliminated from the argument right away. They cannot be right. They have been practicing an imposture on the human species for centuries, for millennia. We happen to live in the lucky period where their claims have been found to be false or superfluous or super-erogatory. There is therefore no other way in which you can decide your vote tonight.
Professor Dawkins.
I would just add to that the science of any one century is going to be superseded by the science of future centuries, such that if somebody from, say, the Middle Ages were to be brought back by a time machine to now, they would find mobile phones and computers and jet aeroplanes. They would be indistinguishable from magic. They would appear to be supernatural. So I am a materialist. I don't believe there is anything supernatural. But don't think of that as a denigration of the natural, because if you were to come back in 500 years' time, you wouldn't have seen nothing yet. The physics, the engineering, the biology of 500 years' time will be so far advanced over today's that we might well fall on our knees and worship it as supernatural, but it wouldn't be. It would be the evolved natural.
Anthony, do you want to add? to that?
Yes, just very quickly, I second both those sets of remarks, of course. I just want to add, though, that thinking that there is just the natural world governed by natural laws and that there aren't supernatural entities or agencies in the universe, still less any that have any direct interest in, as Hitch says, what we wear and what we eat and when and so on. In thinking that, one mustn't, again, fall into another trap, which is to think that somehow your attitude to the natural world is one of so-called fundamentalist certainty. And the great thing about the scientific mindset is its acceptance of open texture, of the fact there are lots of things we don't know and understand, and we're looking for and trying to understand, and we're prepared not to leap to closure, to leap to a neat, easy story to understand, which tells us what the beginning was and what the end's going to be. Now, very often, in the case of people who appeal to religions to provide that kind of explanation, what they're doing is that they're answering the question, why is there a world, by saying, well, because Fred made it, as if that answered anything. Substitute God for Fred there, by the way. Or, you know, why are we here? Because Fred wants us to be. You haven't answered anything if you give a supernaturalistic answer to it. But the fact that there are lots of unanswered questions in science is just the fact about this preparedness, the intellectual courage to go on not knowing all the answers, but looking for them.
As actually Professor Sidney Morgenbesser said, when asked the question, why is there something rather than nothing, said, if there was nothing, you'd still be complaining.
Right, I'm going to wrap up. Christopher Hitchens, will you take the question about, Christopher, the question of...
I'm sorry?
The question about the line-drawing Jew, the practice of religion being about the tone of living, a framework, and about self-restraint.
Well, that's dead easy, just like the rabbi just now. His religion is man-made too. He decides what he'd like to believe. It's a la carte. He says, shouldn't my children be taught, what was it, self-restraint, responsibility, care for others, and so on? I don't believe in the rest of it, don't believe in the prophets, don't believe in the mountaintop, don't believe in the revelation. Well, nor should you. But how dare you suggest to us that we couldn't teach our children self-restraint and respect for others and the golden rule? How dare you?
Dr. Spivey, I think... Richard?
I face two questions. Firstly, is religion true? And second, is it necessary for human psychological welfare or something of that sort? If it isn't true, then for anybody to maintain that somehow humans need it and you're wasting your time trying to get rid of it, what an amazingly patronizing and condescending thing to say. We intellectuals, of course, know that it's not true, but all those poor people out there, they need religion. I mean, what a condescending thing to say about all those people. Either it's true or it's not. And I have enough respect for people to say that if it's not true, people will reconcile themselves to that and will not find any need for it. Now, I was asked a specific question, is it in the genes? Is there some Darwinian reason for religiosity? Maybe there is, but that doesn't bear in the slightest degree on whether it's true. I care about whether it's true. I also care, as a Darwinian, about the origin of it, and I'm interested in the origin of it, and I'm inclined to agree with the implied suggestion of the questioner that it may be that religion itself has no advantage, but it may be that it's a byproduct of some other psychological disposition which does. But that is an entirely separate question from whether it's true, and I don't like it when people say, oh, humans need it, or we have it built into us in our genes, or Darwinian natural selection has built into it, therefore that somehow validates it. Of course it doesn't validate it. It merely says that it's been built into us by natural selection, just as all sorts of other probably disagreeable things have been built into us. Doesn't mean we can't try to cure ourselves.
Right. Okay, can I just... Quickly.
The point about transcendence.
Well, I was going to actually put that to Roger Scruton as it was addressed to that particular side of the argument.
But we
I think
were
that's
asked
only fair.
if we could have transcendence without thousands of bodies, and I'd like to speak to that.
Right.
Just very briefly. The answer, of course, is yes. I mean, it's a wonderful fact about human beings that they have this yearning for the absolute, that they sense the numinous, that in moments of great passion, infatuation, deep love, they feel that they're in touch with something which is richly important to them in their experience. Those are facts about human beings. In order to explain those facts, you don't have to go to the supermarket of ideas and take a deep frozen box out which says Islam or Christianity or something. You don't need that explanation. This is just a fact about us, and a very wonderful fact about us, and it may be that we can express that all the more wonderfully if we didn't try to parcel it up in these explanations which are in so many other ways irrational.
And might I just
Yes, Christopher.
a sentence to Anthony's, but we don't want people to live without wonder or mystery, and in fact we thoroughly recommend, take a look through the Hubble telescope, see if you can get over what you see, the unbelievable beauty and symmetry and majesty of what you'll see. And you want to exchange this for the burning bush? I don't think you will once you've done it. Read a page of Stephen Hawking on the event horizon, for example, and see if that isn't awe-inspiring enough for anybody. And you're seeing there the future of a potentially much more noble and ennobled and enlightened and emancipated humanity, where none of these discoveries and none of this awe and majesty requires that you kill anyone in the name of some man-made idol or god or superstition. For heaven's sake, let's get this out of the way.
By what measure do you conclude fact, and does Darwinism satisfy that measure? In other words, how do you protect yourself from deception, and how did Darwinism or evolution pass that filter?
Fine. You taking that on board? This question here?
Yes, I'm from the National Secular Society, and I'd like to ask the opponents of the motion whether they think that life for women and homosexuals would have been better or worse without religion.
Fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Fine. A question about the measure. The measure, I wasn't quite sure what the big was.
Fact.
Yes.
The measure of the factuality of evolution is the same as in any other science. Some of the things that scientists have found are found with great confidence. Scientists are always open to the possibility of being proved wrong at some point in the future, but there are some things that seem at any one stage in history far better demonstrated than others. The fact of evolution is about as well demonstrated as anything we know. It is absolutely certain by the normal standards, the same kind of standards as we are certain that the Earth rotates and the Sun doesn't go around the Earth. Formally we have to say, well, that's a hypothesis that might one day be disproved, but we all know that it won't be. And evolution has now come into that category. I don't mean that Darwin's theory of natural selection, at least as the only driving force of evolution, that probably should be treated as slightly more uncertain, but the fact of evolution itself, by which I mean the fact that all living creatures that have ever been looked at on this planet are cousins sharing a common ancestor, that is as secure a fact as any in science.
And the question...
Only because I was named, because I was asked by name, I feel very tentative to second Professor Dawkins in this area, but I would just remind you of what Carl Sagan said on this, which was, he said that there is no doubt that evolution has occurred. It's in the molecular biological record, it's in the fossil record. There are disputes about how it occurred. The Darwinian theory is only the original one of how that might have taken place. And Darwin himself set out as an original taxonomist in order to prove the truth of Christianity. Just as Sir Isaac Newton believed in alchemy and Joseph Priestley, the discoverer of oxygen, believed in the phlogiston theory. We are always ready, all of us on this side, to be self-critical, to have a war within the war among scientists, among those who believe in innovation, evidence, hypotheses, and their testing. But that's entirely different from anything that is based on faith, on the supernatural, or on revelation, all of which belongs to the abject childhood of our species, before these things could even be discussed. There's no contest between the two magisteria, if you like.
Can I finally put the last question? Christopher.
I think I'll address myself principally to Dr. Spivey, who has ducked the motion, not by saying that religion should be transcended, or we would be better off if it were to be, but rather like Dr. Scruton has simply said, well, we can't hope to. We're stuck with it. Well, that's not what the motion says. The motion says, suppose we could, as some of us have, transcended the supernatural and the superstitious, would our example, if followed, not be a superior one? I think we've made a pretty strong case for that. I'll correct him also on another point, a very common misapprehension, and I'll try and demonstrate in doing so that we are not on this side deaf to the numinous, as it were. It is flat out not true to say that Karl Marx referred to religion as an opiate or an opium. What he says, I can quote it from memory, from his contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, is this. He says, religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of the heartless world, the spirit of the spiritless situation. It is an opiate for the sufferer, for the people. So he goes on to say, the demand to give up its illusion is the demand to give up the condition that requires illusions. And he closes by saying that criticism has plucked the flowers from the chain, not so that men and women may wear the chain without consolation, but so that they may break the chain and cull the living flower. Now, the fact that you've been lied to about what he said all this time by religious spokesmen shouldn't conceal from you the knowledge that we have a very clear understanding of where this impulse comes. I actually don't like the Sistine Chapel. I didn't like it even before I knew that every brick of St. Peter's was raised by the sale of indulgences, which obviously changes nothing for Dr. Scruton either, by a special sale of indulgences, by the way. But I do like the Parthenon very much, and I've written a book about it. And I think as an achievement of artistic symmetry and architectural glory, it probably has no Christian rival. But I believe that I can. In fact, I know I can. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has been there and said and appreciated and loved it without having to subscribe to the superstitions of the Eleusinian mysteries, to the cult of Athena and Zeus, to the Melian expedition and the Peloponnesian War, to slavery and Athenian imperialism, and to human sacrifice. We can have our Parthenon, and we can indeed recover it from what was done to it by Byzantine Ottomans, by Venetian Catholics, by National Socialist barbarians and many others. We can still have it. It's our common property without the superstitions that go with it, without the dread and fear and sacrifice, the terrified, cringing humanity that was so much sheltered under the walls as it was being raised. And the word for that, the ability to have these things, to have John Milton's poetry, to have Philip Larkin's poem Churchgoing, to have Shakespeare, without the superstition, is called culture, on which we've all laid our lives, on which we've all sworn to defend ourselves and our civilization against, especially now, precisely against religious barbarism, against those who know they are right, against those who say they only need one book, against those who say they know God's on their side, against those who say there's a revelation. That's what culture is. That's what we're defending. Yes, we'd be better off with culture, and yes, we can have it without religion, which is a mind-forged manacle. Thanks.
Thank you.
Although I can't recall ever having kissed a photograph, I have wept when reading poetry, when listening to music. I think that those on this side have come to rather resent the suggestion that religion has a monopoly on emotion, on poetry. On sympathy, on empathy. Everybody in this room, I dare say, has felt deep grief at the sight or the thought of a suffering individual somewhere in the world, maybe even of another species. That does seem to be something in humanity, to feel empathy with suffering. And as a Darwinian, I can offer explanations for that. I won't do it now because there isn't time. But it is a travesty that has somehow become widely accepted that if you throw out religion, you throw out the Good Samaritan. You throw out weeping at a sonnet of Shakespeare or at a Schubert quartet. It has nothing whatever to do with religion in the sense of the supernatural. Of course, you can redefine religion as covering all these emotional, artistic aspects. And in that case, of course, there's no contest. But I suggest that that's confusing and that we need to define religion as belief in something supernatural. You get your beliefs not from evidence, but from faith, from revelation, from tradition, from scripture, from authority. Now, all those are very bad reasons to believe anything. Evidence is the only reason to believe something. And that's the second point that I want to make in closing. But the first one, the main one I want to make, is that we are all in this together. We are all capable of the same kinds of emotions. We're all capable of wanting to free the slaves and all the things, all the good things that have been talked about, whether we're religious or not. You cannot give religion the credit for any of those things. They are a part of humanity. The good things are a part of humanity, just as the bad things are part of humanity, whether you are religious or not.
Lost in thought for a moment there. I think it's perfectly clear from the conversation that we've had among us this evening that to do good, to be good, to want the good, to want it to prevail, you don't have to be anything. You don't have to be a subscriber to Hinduism or the Olympian gods or the Norse gods or anything. In fact, on the contrary, if you look back across the landscape of history and you see how humanity has been loaded with suffering and division and conflict as a result of religious differences, you look back, you see that early Christians of different sects who loathed one another so much that when they were thrown to the lions, they used to run to opposite ends of the thing so they wouldn't be eaten by the same lions. And you look at what's happening in Baghdad today, you think of the way history screams at us with gory throats about the atrocities that have been committed in the name of faith. And you ask yourself, isn't it the case that these very natural, very warm feelings that human beings can have for one another when they know one another individually, and it becomes impossible to generalize? I mean, if you know somebody from another nation or another culture, another ethnicity, you know somebody well personally, it's very, very hard to continue to generalize, to accept the sorts of divisions that people want to impose because of labels, because of the identities that they choose for themselves. And you see that the deepest division that has existed between people in human history, recorded human history, is the set of religious differences which has been productive of so much conflict and suffering. And you think of that and you move to the individual sphere. You think of the teenager who is anxious because his private feelings may be leading him into sin, or he's done something that may damn his immortal soul because he's been told that it will. You think about the torment of that. So on every scale, you can think of ways in which religion, religious belief, religious hegemony, religious oppression has stood in the path of the good. And we know from the historical record how organized religious bodies have resisted tooth and nail every inch of progress that's been made in science. Look at the history of the modern West, for example, since the Reformation. The desire to increase the liberty of the individual against the desire of religion supporting absolute monarchy to keep control over individuals. The idea of the secret policeman who sees what you do in the dark, it's a wonderful instrument of control over people's minds. And what has been sought in the period of time that has elapsed since the Reformation has been an increasing margin of discretion for individuals to make their own choices, make up their own mind, and to live a life which is free of those trammels, in which their imagination and their will is not loaded down with ancient stories that come from the infancy of humankind. Would we be better off without religion? So much better off if only we could breathe the free air of our personal liberty, our choice, our freedom to love one another as human beings and cooperate with one another, not because of labels, not because we don't want to go to hell, but because we choose to.
100 don't knows. And the vote now for the resolution that we'd be better off without religion is 1,205, and against, that's also gone up, 778. So the motion is carried. Thank you.